Can you believe I was just sitting on this double pack for a month without touching it? I've just been a little preoccupied waiting for whatever new Rockman DLC to come out, I guess. My history of Metro is almost something resembling an actual history. I got very far through 2033 around 6 months after it came out, got stuck near the end, and when I tried to finish it off, the disc wouldn't work. 4 years passed, and I never bothered to buy another copy. But I did pick up the book Metro 2033, and never bothered to read it because I haven't read a work of fiction in years. And now that you know the idea of academia has turned me off reading for some time, let's actually talk about the game. So after World War III, everyone in Russia had to retreat underground and stay in metro stations for as long as the fallout remained. Given it's been around 20 years since the bombs fell, no one's optimistic about returning to the surface. You are Artyom, hanging around Exhibition Station when an old friend, Hunter, drops in before the station is invaded. He tells you that if he does not return from a recon in a day's time, you have to go to Polar Station to get help before the attacks get too great. And while that's your only goal, a million distractions happen along the way. Your first way out is as a caravan guard, then you're helping out a drifter through the sewers and on the surface, and then he gets captured and you're forced to sneak through a group of bandits before joining up with a war veteran mystic who can literally talk to ghosts. And by the 2-hour mark, you're forced to hitch a ride into a battle between communists and Nazis. Russian Nazis. Even if you were to take out all the post-apocalypse, or even the interplay between stealth, shooting and survival horror, Metro 2033 would still be a great game on sheer variety and pacing. Because you have only one destination, the game is basically a road trip through post-apocalyptic Russia, and through that road trip you get to make so many loose allegiances, see so many factions and locales, and find yourself in so many situations, it's impossible to get burnt out. Throughout this travel, you also get to pick up journal entries that document Artyom's thoughts, and it's surprisingly effective seeing this youth come to philosophical conclusions about everything he sees, such as even in all his supposed salvation he has to kill a lot of people. And even if you don't bother to listen to all of the dialogue, each station's little details help to richen the world. In fact, a lot of little details do. Lens flare isn't just a pretty effect in this game, it can obscure your view by a great deal. Same thing happens if you stare into a laser directly, and you don't want that to happen because combat is pretty tricky. On the hardest difficulty, a few bullets are enough to take you down, and the salvos from multiple foes is usually an instant kill, but you can also deal a great deal of damage in a short amount of time, so any single encounter is short but harsh. If you're not good at using cover, you're gonna die a lot. Throw in any amount of variables and things get really interesting. If you're gung-ho enough during the Nazi and Communist level, you can get the two sides to truly engage each other. And the same thing always happens when you're outside, and you have to deal with the mutants as well. And if you get hit too many times when you're outside, your gas mask will break, so you have to be really careful about when you engage. Hell, it even makes on-rails sections engaging. And even though the game is linear, most stealth sections are open enough that you can really tackle them multiple ways. Every individual encounter generally has something new to offer, but the game never strays from what makes it its own beast. Even when you're not being directly harmed, the harshness of the environment is never bastardized, something which is hard for a lot of games, even games I really like, to get right. The game never feels modal, it just feels like a brilliant rollercoaster ride through post-apocalypse hell, and you just have to hold on and pray you make it. That's not even to say the game is bereft of quiet moments, or even a few mechanical cul-de-sacs. There are 2, maybe 3 moral choices that affect absolutely nothing. Why are they there? Well, you have to have a few of those in an environment where the scarcity of everything is emphasized, I guess. In terms of actual problems, the controls for PS4 are a bit counterintuitive. The sensitivity starts off way too low. You have to ramp it up if you actually want to hit the enemies behind you. And much like Far Cry 4, all of the options are hidden behind sub-menus, which you have to hold a shoulder button for, which isn't too much of a problem unless you start the game on Ranger Hardcore. The game didn't tell me how to put on my mask, and I died before beating the tutorial. Of course, this wasn't a problem by the time I hit Last Light, and I suppose now I could just replay 2033 if I want the absolute best experience. By that point, the only lingering problems I have are the jumping puzzles right at the end and the ending itself. It wasn't very fulfilling in a physical sense, but it did make you look at and think about the state of the world considering your action. I have to wonder if the book was this navel-gazy, because I doubt it had this many action set pieces. Hell, from what I heard, Artyom dies halfway through. But because he made it to the end of this game, now we have Last Light. After nuking the Dark Ones, the war veteran mystic from the last game tells us that there is yet one more who lives, and that we should try to talk him down rather than kill him. The guy giving us the orders has other ideas, but even if he was on board, the Nazis get there first, both of you are captured, and you have to chase the Dark One across the metro. That's how it starts, but it very soon gives way to a Civil War storyline, where both the Reds and the Reich are gearing up to take over the base your order is established in, and naturally you'll have to race back to Polis to again send another warning. As the game starts, you're pretty much being towed along by whoever your partner happens to be at that point, usually this commie Pavel. You're still jumping from place to place, but what is there to see? You're given a central objective at the beginning of the game, but it's not until the 2/3 mark that it starts to come to fruition. Before then is a lot of exposition on the brewing civil war this game is based on, and soon enough the goal of finding the Dark One is all but forgotten until Pavel, who has switched sides by this point, casually lets slip he knows where it is. And from that point the story just gets stupid. The first game had elements of the supernatural, but I would argue those parts were more about the mystery of the surroundings. It was more about the questions than the answers. In Last Light, the game leans really hard on strange anomalies and creatures from the last game, and they throw in even more without ever giving a coherent explanation. Artyom himself prefers to handwave a lot of it as, well, stranger things have happened, or I have no choice but to believe it. But my suspension of disbelief just isn't strong enough for things like a literal wishing well in the sewer. And while the set pieces are still very good, you can tell they went for a more Hollywood approach. One of the last action bits is the shootout on a train with a swelling orchestral soundtrack, and the ending is very cliched and typical, and kind of antithetical to the mood established when you really think about it, especially considering it has to reconcile one of the most forced and quickest love stories ever. You may notice I haven't talked much about the actual gameplay of Last Light, and that's because there isn't a lot to add. It's almost identical to the first, more so because this is all Redux, and that's fine by me. The game's a little longer and sometimes drags because of it, the guards are bigger buffoons than ever, and there are no great survival horror bits like the Librarians in 2033, but it retains the brutal health system, just making every gunfight a joyous challenge. And unlike in 2033, it seems like running out of filters is an actual threat in this one, and having to hastily run from one checkpoint to the next to scrounge up filters is tension you can bottle and sell. But I also had over 10 minutes of filters left by the end of the game because one of the last sections is a series of 3 or 4 levels entirely outdoors. There's very little I can actively complain about outside of the story, and in fact it's very good that the gameplay remains good throughout because the story has completely fallen off by the time you hit the credits. But while Last Light was mostly fun, 2033 was fun all the way through. It's probably one of the single best first-person shooters ever made. It has a fairly unique atmosphere, a good mix of stealth and action and freedom and linearity, very good pacing, and a great story whose best moments aren't just spoon-fed to you. You can tell the first game was based off a novel, while the second one was not. Maybe this is a sign that the novella business is in fact running circles around video games in terms of narrative ability, and maybe if a few more games are based off of books, they would also have great stories without having to lead you to its best moments by your nose. But we'll talk about that when the time comes.